All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm Daniel Silberstein. I'm with the Diagnostic Center of Northern California. I'm going to be talking about dyslexia and universal design for learning and how those two can intertwine and how to support all students in a classroom, no matter what their reading abilities are. Thanks so much for joining me. Sort of my agenda here today. Is this. I'm going to talk about my employer, which is the Diagnostic Center of Northern California. I'm going to introduce the state's dyslexia guidelines and the state's adopted definition of dyslexia. I'm going to talk about screening for the two big components of a dyslexic profile, one of those being phonological processing, the other being orthographic processing. And then I'm going to talk about how we can use UDL strategies to support all learners in our classrooms, no matter their reading skills, whether they meet the criteria of being at risk for dyslexia or the formalized criteria for a dyslexic profile and a specific learning disability. And if there's time at the end, I can answer questions. I'm going to do some pretty poor teaching in this training. I'm going to sort of talk at you going through the whole sort of the presentation. If you do have pressing questions, you can always stop me and ask. Hopefully you find this training useful. Nice to see you out there. Hey. So I work at the Diagnostic Center of Northern California. There are 3 diagnostic centers in the state. I work for the Northern California one, so I serve from the bottom of Monterey County all the way up to the state border. There's also the Diagnostic Center in Fresno and one in Los Angeles. And we do 3 things at the Diagnostic Center. We are part of the California Department of Education. We do student assessments. So if you want some psychoeducational disability clarification or academic strategies, you can make a referral to the diagnostic centers, and we do free comprehensive evaluation from students from 3 to 22 years old. We also do trainings. So if, hey, I went to Daniel's training, that guy, there was like 3 jokes that landed. You can always look at our website and join one of the trainings. You can email us to get the Zoom link. And then we do something called technical assistance projects, where we spearhead initiative in special education in a region. So we have a number of projects running on PSW model, pattern strength and weakness model for specific learning disability, autism, AAC device, UDL, things like that. So that's my background of where I've come from, and then we'll jump into it. Thank you guys for joining me. Reading is hard. And reading literacy development can be really hard. And why that is how our brains are wired. Our brains are wired for auditory communication. We are not necessarily, as humans, wired to take these abstract symbols. Some of them are connected to sounds, and those sounds are connected to meaning. Most students, unless you have a developmental language disorder, are able to talk with little effort or other neurodiversity, but 30% have difficulty with reading. And again, language is natural, but reading and writing are a man-made construct. And so neurocognitively, it's a very challenging process. And again, it involves most of our brain. You need your phonological processing, sort of this sound-based process, hearing sounds, manipulating sounds. You need their sight process, right? Recognizing and also associating these letter patterns with sounds. Some of them don't play fair phonetically, so orthographically, right? Oh, that's DGE, that's going to say J. That's TION, it's not going to say T-E-on, it's going to say shun, right? All this sort of stuff you have to automatically recall, and all these different firings of our brain. And then if you think about the UDL part, right, it's also sort of a whole brain, sort of lens to look at a student and how to break down the barriers and support their academic development. And here's another way to look at it. This is Scarborough's rope, which is sort of a simple view of reading, how things, come together neurocognitively, right? Your phonological awareness, your word recognition signs. So I'm going to talk about phonological awareness a lot in this training. I'm sorry, but that's a sound-based process. It's a pre-reading skill, right? So hearing large units of sounds like words in a sentence or syllables or even individual phonemes. And then decoding, right, connecting the symbols. And then down there you see it says sight recognition. We're not talking about sight words. It's the automaticity of the visual recognition of these letter patterns and how quickly you can recall them. That has to intertwine with your language, right? Your background knowledge, your vocabulary, your verbal reasoning to create comprehension, which is what skilled reading is getting at. So there's a lot of reasons why reading can be hard for a student. There's a lot of breakdowns and a lot of reasons why it can break down. Not all of those breakdowns necessarily meet the criteria of being dyslexia, but we know there's going to be students who struggle with reading in our classes. So how do we meet their needs? And we'll sort of talk about that here in the training. And like when you think about UDL, and I'm sure you guys have all seen the CAST sort of guidelines or checkpoints, there's a lot of places where this reading comes in, especially in the multiple means of representation, right? Is it within the perception, like their ability to actually access the text and how we can actually modify or change the way the text looks to support the students in their reading? Is it within the language and symbols? Like, is it helping clarify the vocabulary or actually teaching them a morphology or decoding program that can actually benefit their literacy development? And then, of course, for their comprehension. And so there's a lot of different areas within UDL and sort of, reading challenges where they all overlap. I'm going to kind of give you guys background about dyslexia. I hope this is not and how the state defines dyslexia. I hope this is not redundant for you guys. But for many years, dyslexia was a controversial term, right? Because everyone has read a BuzzFeed news quiz or seen the cartoon, right? Where the B and the D and the P and the Q like flip around. And that's what dyslexia was, right? It was sort of this visual process of like letter reversals. So in 2015, due to the confusion about what dyslexia was and wasn't, the state of California decided to clarify the definition so school teams across the state would have a unified voice for how to talk about dyslexia. And also in 2015, in a Dear Colleagues letter, the Federal Department of Education affirmed there's nothing in IDEA, the federal special education law, that would prohibit the use of dyscalculia, dyslexia, or dysgraphia in IEP evaluations, eligibility determinations, or IEP documents. So you can use these terms. Again, I would be careful with when you do and when you don't, and thinking that how it's going to benefit the student as a whole, and make it a team-based decision. So that's something to consider as well. And again, dyslexia is a medical term, but we are beholden here into the educational code and the psychoeducational code criteria. So we are not diagnosing anyone with dyslexia. If a student does meet formal dyslexia criteria, I get really wordy with it. I would say, oh, bloody blue meets the state dyslexia guidelines criteria of having a dyslexic profile as with a specific learning disability. That's a mouthful. And I'm going to talk later in the training about SB 114, which maybe you guys have heard of, which is the new dyslexia mandate where dyslexia screeners are going to come down the pipe. So there's going to be more of this out there, and the term is going to be out there. And so for us as educators, thinking about how we're going to respond to this tier 1 universal screening legislation that's passed. And again, dyslexia exists on a continuum that ranges from mildly affected to severely impaired. So some students can have like a very typical dyslexic profile, right? Overall average cognitive abilities, a domain-specific cognitive weakness in their sound-based process, but it maybe doesn't impact their reading that much. And on the flip side too, they can have mild phonologic deficits or orthographic deficits, and it's really impactful in their reading. But again, 30% of people have challenges with reading development, and for a host of different reasons. And a lot of the studies out there say there's like 17 to 22% of the population has a dyslexic profile. It's the largest group of students with an SLD is dyslexia. So these students are certainly in our classes, and then it's our needs to figure out, okay, how to make this sort of a tier 1 program to support all these students who have trouble with literacy development. So then just a little background about what happened here in the state. In 2017, the guidelines came out, for students to assist regular education, general education, and parents to identify, assess, and plan, provide, and evaluate, and then improve their educational services for students who are identified as at risk or with dyslexia. And again, this is going to be sort of an all tenet, right? Just like the UDL sort of tenet, like all means all here, right? All students. These are our general education students first, whether they have these reading challenges or not. So a couple other things happened in the legislation. One, there was a modification to the educational code to include dyslexia and phonological processing in the definition of a specific learning disability. So again, we're talking about a dyslexic profile, we're talking about an SLD, so all the other components of a specific learning disability must be there. But the likely cognitive processing area, the area that's causing the weakness in the reading, is typically phonological processing, a sound-based process. I'll talk about orthographic processing in this training as well. You'll see the smoke come out of my bald head. It's a little bit more complicated with teasing out what orthographic processing and where that lies within this. So here's the definition of dyslexia the state adopted, right? It's a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. I showed you guys all those brain pictures at the beginning. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluid word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. Again, we're thinking about a dyslexic profile. We're thinking about word level reading initially, right? Is the student struggling in word level reading? I certainly would recommend, if you're doing a screening or an assessment, to do both timed and untimed word level reading and word level decoding. So two separate skills. You want to compare those two and how the student is functioning, where they can just like sound out everything and then they get the word right. There's really actually a time pressure, when it comes to reading and, comprehension. So those are the areas you want to look at academically. And there's a lot of research around brain firing, brain imaging, and a typically developing reader and a dyslexic reader and how their brain fires are different. So this is a neurocognitive process. Another reason you'd want to know that in terms of like formal evaluation. Oftentimes we do a formal evaluation for a student, for SLD in like 3rd grade, when there's enough like reading challenge, to have a discrepancy between their cognitive ability and their academics. And they get identified as having phonological processing areas of deficit and a reading challenge. And then you go back for your reevaluation in 3 years. Well, phonological awareness can slowly improve over time, especially if you learn how to read. So their phonological awareness skills may no longer have a discrepancy with their, or a domain-specific cognitive weakness and causing a discrepancy in their overall academics, and they may not qualify for services. But this is a neurocognitive process, right? It's going to follow this student for life. And so, how is their fluency going to follow? How's their comprehension as they learn how to, read better on a word level? So that's one thing to think about as well. The difficulties, right, in their word level reading, decoding, and spelling typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is unexpected in relation to their other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So when you're thinking about trying to determine if a student has dyslexia, right, typically the cognitive processing area that would be weak would be their phonological processing, the sound-based process, right? Not vision, not letter reversals, right? Hearing sounds, manipulating sounds, blending sounds, all that sort of. I don't know why I'm going, oh, there's my ears right here. That's why. You got to rule out all the other cognitive stuff in a formal evaluation. And then you have to, think that there's been some effective classroom instruction. That part is like, has a student missed a bunch of time in kindergarten and 1st grade, or they're like, did they have a substitute for 2 years, or whatever it is? That's when you could think about what the factors are there in terms of instruction. And then finally, secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Obviously, if they're struggling on a word level, their reading comprehension is going to be impacted. and their vocabulary and background knowledge will as well. So that's the definition of dyslexia the state adopted. Where did this come from? This is from the International Dyslexia Association in 2002. Most states have the same definition of dyslexia on the books. California just chose to use IDA's definition of dyslexia. The way the guidelines read is that along with the below expected reading outcomes, a student will likely demonstrate a weakness in one or more of the phonological processes: phonological awareness, phonological memory, and rapid naming skill. So again, I'm talking about I will get to the UDL stuff. I promise you, I'm just giving you all this background on dyslexia. But when you think about doing a screening, like a tier 1 dyslexia screening, right? Your phonological awareness, your ability to hear sounds, manipulate sounds, blend sounds, and your rapid naming are really the areas you're going to want to look at. Phonological memory is just your phonologic loop of your working memory. So it's a sort of a cognitive process. Certainly you want to know if the student is able to hold sounds in their working memory. It's going to be a harder one to screen. So that's just the two big ones I'd want to hit, or you should hit, are their phono awareness and rapid naming skills. And I've sort of touched on this before, but your phonological awareness, right, is your ability to manipulate large chunks of sound, like words in a sentence, right? Like the, ball, rolls, or individual phonemes, right? Like ch, at, and then blend them and manipulate them. One of the biggest predictors of if a student should have reading success is their ability to manipulate phonemes, right? So take chat, take away the ch, make it b, and they go bat. If they can do that skill, oftentimes the likelihood is that they will be successful in reading proposition. There's a number of reasons where they could fall apart too if the RAN is not great. Phonological memory is, like I said before, the phonologic loop of your working memory. The way you'd assess that is, like a digit span, where I would say a string of numbers and then you'd spit them back to me, 7432, and then be 7432, or the nonsense repetition tasks, things like that. And then rapid automatized naming. And this is one I was a teacher and I didn't know what this was. So this is how quickly a student can name digits, colors, numbers. You need efficient retrieval of information from your long-term memory, like letter patterns, colors, things like that. Otherwise, think about all the letter patterns in English that you have to quickly retrieve. And if you don't have an efficiency and you haven't categorized them in efficient categories, it's going to be really hard. So RAN is a really important part of a dyslexic profile and a dyslexia screening or formal assessment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about screening, and then we're going to jump into it. One of the challenges with screening is, when students are identified. It's because in pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, their phonological processing, their letter recognition starts coming on. And then in kindergarten and first grade, their grapheme, they start connecting letters to sounds, and they start reading sight words, and they start reading little text, sentences and connected text. And then later in elementary school, they start reading complex text for fluency and comprehension. And where do we identify students who are struggling, right? Like I mentioned earlier, in third grade, when the reading is hard enough to have a discrepancy for them to qualify for services or to, whatever it is. But the most effective window for dyslexia intervention is early. The brain has the most plasticity at this time. So if we can intervene with those students in a tier 1 screening and then provide them interventions within their classrooms, we can really make progress supporting these students and keeping them out of the special education pipeline. So that's sort of the goal here. And again, thinking about UDL, yes, a few students are going to need intensified support. Some students are going to need tier 2 additional support, after your dyslexia screener or whatever it is. And all students are going to need universal support. And we're going to start, in terms of dyslexia, with universal screenings in kindergarten through second grade to identify, what students may be at risk for weaknesses in their phonological processing and their orthographic processing, and then supporting those students with tier 2 interventions. And again, the guidelines say best practices is kindergarten through second grade, and I'll skip down here to talk a little bit about the legislation that passed as well. And again, it will be a universal screening The goal of the screening is who needs more assessment and intervention, and your instructional response is key. A dyslexia screening, a reading difficulty screening is just to determine the student's risk. It's not for formal evaluation, right? It's just screening your students and figuring out, okay, I know these students are struggling here. What tier 2 intervention can I provide for them? What profile do they match? Is it a phonologically based challenge? Is it a site-based challenge, like an orthographic challenge? And then what type of intervention would best support those students' needs? So here's some areas to screen. Their phonological awareness, which I talked about, large units first. Just be careful with rhyming. I think people often think that rhyming is the easiest phonologic task. Well, only if the student understands the concept, right? If they don't understand what a concept of a rhyme is, or they give you the onset rhyme, not the actual rhyme, well, then it's not accurate, right? But does that mean they can't hear it, or they just don't understand the concept? So just be careful there. Your phonemic awareness, so blending, isolating, letter identification, letters found correspondence, word level reading, decoding, and spelling. The higher level stuff, right? We're talking about for kindergarten through second grade student screeners. There's not going to be a ton of like connected text, that they're going to need to read here. We're just talking about on a word level to start. So here are some phonologic screening tools. Informally, there's the PASS, the Phonological Awareness Skills Screener, the QPASS, the Quick Phonological Awareness Screening, the PASS, the Phonological Awareness Screening Test, Core Phonological Segmentation Test, and then any curriculum connected assessments such as Hegarty, 95% group. There's a ton of other like curriculum connected, FastBridge, Easy CBM, all that sort of stuff, iReady, Amplify MClass. Like there's a ton of different phonologic screeners out there, or dyslexia screeners. Some of them are paid programs. These ones often are free. So you could just try them in your programs. Here's the past. I'm just worried about running out of time here. So here's what a phonologic screener looks like. So on the past, whoops, whoa, that was wild. On the past, it goes through a basic syllable, then an onset rhyme, then a basic phoneme and advanced phoneme level. So on the basic syllable level, they're just going to delete a syllable. Let me just.
Good. Okay. These are going to get a little bit.
Nope.
Good. Say Saturday.
Saturday.
Say Saturday, but don't say sat.
Saturday.
Say tricycle.
Tricycle.
Say tricycle, but don't say try.
Cycle.
Good. Okay.
Okay, now he's going to move on to the onset rhyme level, which is where he'll take away the first sound of a word.
These are going to get a little bit harder, okay? Ready? Say feet.
Feet.
Now say feet, but don't say
Eat.
good. Say love.
Love.
Now say love, but don't say ooh.
Of.
Yep, good. Say tame.
Tame.
Now say tame, but don't say
Aim.
yep.
Okay, so that's the onset rhyme one where he takes it away. Then the other one will be the one where with the manipulation, right, where it says say guide, now say guide, but we're chase the g with an sound, and he'd have to say ride. So that's the past. Again, these are informal screeners. So you're not going to get a standard score. You're not going to get a percentile rank. You're just going to compare your peers to each other and determine, okay, this group struggling here on their phonological awareness. What can I do to support them in class in the tier 2 setting, but also like in general, what sort of ways could I break down the barriers for them when they're accessing the curriculum as a whole, knowing that they may be at risk for reading deficits. Here's the PASS. So again, it's not like a gold standard of phonologic screeners. It's just the one I could fit on one page. And you can see there's like a rhyme score, a blending score, a segmenting score, a deletion score, and a phoneme discrimination score. Again, there's some ones that you get a pretty good bang for your buck here. I mean, if you do word discrimination, if the student is not able to hear the difference between back and bag, something may be going on there in terms of, their ability to hear these sounds and see the difference and feel the differences. Can they blend syllables? Can they blend phonemes and make it into a word? Things like that. So there's ways that you can sort of pick and choose a battery of little subtests here and see where your students fall in terms of their phonological processing. And then rapid naming screener, here's like a color rapid naming screener. So all you do on a rapid naming screener or rapid naming screening is like, have the students say the colors, the digits as quickly as they can. Red, green, blue, yellow, black, blue, yellow, red, black, green. And you time them. And again, you are going to compare them to their peers. There's not a standard score. There's not a percentile rank. All you're doing is comparing those to their students in their class. And if a student has a weakness in both their phonological awareness and their rapid naming, those are students you're certainly going to want to support first. That's a dual deficit, and they are going to be the hardest students to support in terms of their academic development. Here's like a letters task, right? O, E, T, P, Q, E, O, T, P, Q, P. And then you time them. So again, time task, figure out what your cut point is, or like I would just take your bottom 10% or whatever it is and be like, okay, what are we going to do for these kids? They're not making the associations. And one of the things there too is oftentimes, students with rapid naming deficits may have challenges within their orthographic processing if they're not able to like recall those letter patterns or letters or colors, numbers as quickly as they can. Here's what RAND screener looks like. This is the Arkansas one. This guy's a little bit dead inside, but
Up here,
I'll give it to you
is
guys.
colorblind. I will provide a walkthrough of how to give the ARN. When we're finished with the walkthrough of how to give the screener, we will talk through how to analyze the scores. First, you may have the student sit next to you or across from the test administrator. The student may hold or lay the test sheet on the table or desk in front of them. When you are ready to administer the screener, place the practice form in front of the student. Do not show the colors to the student. Use an extra sheet of paper to cover the colors. Tell me the names of the colors on this page. Please read them left to right.
Black, red, yellow, blue, green.
Once the student has finished the practice test and does not have any further questions, move on to Form A of the screener. Place Form A in front of the student. Do not show the student the color portion of the form. Use an extra sheet of paper to cover the colors. Now you will read the colors on this form. You will read left to right, top to bottom. Please read the colors as quickly as you can. You may begin.
Red, green, blue, yellow, black, black, blue, yellow, red, black.
Circle any incorrectly named colors on the student's score sheet. In order to eliminate guessing, self-corrections are capped at 1. It is counted correct if a student says a shade of the color to name the color instead of the name of the color. For example, the student says navy instead of blue. Stop the timer when the student has finished naming the final color.
Okay, well, anyway, there's that.
Record the time.
So again, some other dyslexia screeners. I mentioned these before. You'll notice I'm giving you through the Massachusetts dyslexia guidelines, not the California ones, even though we're likely in California here. I'll talk about that in a second. So these are curriculum adopted ones. If you guys have a curriculum adopted, program, there are phonologic screeners in there, dyslexia screeners in there. But one thing, and I mentioned it earlier, is that SB 114 has now passed, which is a Senate bill for K2 screenings for reading difficulties, including risk of dyslexia. And I think generally saying reading difficulties may make less people spontaneously combust than saying a dyslexia screener, because really we're just looking at reading difficulties and the causes that may be. So a few points along the way there is that, the State Board of Education is going to appoint a panel of experts to look through and determine a list of approved screening instruments. After that, after there's a list of approved reading difficulties screening instruments, the LEAs will adopt one or more screening instrument. And then in the 25-26 school year and annually thereafter, LEAs will screen students kindergarten and second grade for reading difficulties and have to report that out to the parents and determine which students are at risk and which students are not, which includes dyslexia. Again, if they just say phonologic screeners or Reading difficulty screeners, right? That's another thing that may be helpful as opposed to dyslexia, which can be this sort of weighted term because it is a medical term, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about what that is and what it isn't, which is why it's great you guys are training here today so you understand that it's not just necessarily just a visual process, right? That it's a sound, oftentimes a sound-based process. And these students are general education students first, and we're just going to provide them interventions or ways to break down barriers to their reading to support them in a general education setting. And then there's tons of ways to actually screen their words too, not just their phonological processing, the sound-based process, phonological awareness and rapid naming. Screen their word level abilities as well, right? We're talking about word reading, decoding, and spelling. Those areas you really want to look at. There's a ton of different ways to screen their reading skills. If it's your curriculum adopted program, or is it using a phonics survey, which oftentimes have real words and nonsense words. So there's a few there, right? Core phonics survey, BPST, Dibbles, the letters phonics survey. So oftentimes, like on these surveys, right, they read letter sounds, they have sound symbol correspondence, and then do they read real words? A number of them also have real words and nonsense words, like the core phonics survey. It's got real words, it's got nonsense words. Again, like I said, mentioned earlier in the training, it would be great to see timed and untimed, word level reading, decoding, things like that. So you could, put two together, do like, okay, we're gonna do timed on this one. This one's gonna be untimed, and you could kind of create it, because again, these are not standardized assessments. These are screeners. So you're not gonna get a percentile rank. It's not normed on a population of students that you're gonna be like, oh, they're in the 12th percentile, right? You're just gonna be comparing them to their peers. And then figuring out, okay, these students may be at risk for reading challenges. How can we support those students? How can we break down those barriers for them to meet their needs? Here's the letters survey. And then, what do you do after the screening has been done? If a student is at low risk, you continue your evidence-based core reading instruction. If the student is at risk, you continue your evidence-based core reading instruction, right? But you may want more data if the student is at risk, right? Analyze the screening results. What areas are they missing? What letter patterns do they know and not know? Is it what orthographic patterns do they know and not know? Is it decoding? Do they sound out every, sound in a word and it doesn't always work? Or, do they, only know sight words? Whatever it is, and that way you can tailor your intervention program based on the student's skills. So I'm going to jump into a case study here when we'll talk about UDL, and then I'll let you guys go into your merry way. So Taylor's a third grade teacher. So after her screening her students for phonological processing and basic reading skills, she had a group of 2 students who she considers at risk for dyslexia. She had 2 other students who do not demonstrate phonological challenges, but are far behind their peers in reading and writing, because that can happen too. There's a number of reasons why a student can struggle with reading. Not all of them are phonologically based challenges, right? Executive functioning, neurodiversity, behavior, language learners, right? Exposure, all these different factors that come into play. But we know there's going to be students in every class that read at varying levels, right? She also has 5 English language learners in her classroom. So she's going to use UDL strategies to support the students in their reading development and also in their ability to access the curriculum. So we're going to talk a little bit about UDL, and then we'll go from there. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Universal Design for Learning, right? It's just a framework based on cognitive neuroscience for optimizing teaching and learning for all people based on how humans learn. And like we said before, reading takes part of all our, different parts of our brain, and so does UDL. It's also different parts of our brain that we need to access in order to break down the barriers. Accessibility is foundational for flexible learning environments. It's not a specific strategy, right? It's a framework for how to think about your students as a whole and design to meet all their needs. It's focused on the design aspect of learning. So thinking about your thematic units, your lesson plans, your instructional goals, and designing for all students, knowing that some students are language learners and don't, their vocabulary may be at this level, or their reading skills are at this level because they have phonological deficits. So again, it's just a lens for how to look at students and break down the barriers. The nice part about UDL, right, it doesn't purport to replace any existing practices of effective instruction. It's just a lens to make the curriculum materials and teaching practice accessible to all students. So all the quality instruction that you have in your classroom, that gets to stay, right? But you want to think about the lens to improve access for your students, especially students who oftentimes in that representation area have trouble decoding, perception, comprehension. Those areas can be challenging for them. So like I said, that area of representation, language and symbols, comprehension and perception is often an area we can think about when, talking about dyslexia and reading challenges. Obviously, the student has to be engaged and want to learn. The engagement part has to be there. But there are a number of ways to bring in, strategies to increase their understanding of representation and to create access for the students. So the UDL framework is this, right? You set your clear and rigorous goals. You anticipate your barriers, and then you think about your design options. So we're going to sort of walk through this, thinking about my friend Taylor's class here, right? When we think about goals, clear one goal at a time, should be rigorous, it should be flexible, and thinking about how we want to set those. And then where's the breakdown going to happen? And we all know there's going to be variability within a classroom. So why is a problem happening? Is it because they have, phonologic deficits, or is it because, their behavior makes it so they have missed a bunch of reading instruction and now they don't know how to read? Whatever it is, think about those barriers and supporting the students and breaking them down. And then thinking about your design options for how to meet their needs. That's the way to go through it. So got some instructional goals, and I was a former teacher and I like to teach through thematic units. So she's in, third grade. So we're going to do folk tales, which everyone loves. So students are going to read and recount a fable, a folk tale, a myth. Students will write a one-page essay describing the central lesson or moral and how it's conveyed in text. They will draw a picture of the story and present their myth or fable to the class. And again, there's the California Content Standard. So that's the instructional goal, right? She set her clear goal for what she wants the students to do. What are the barriers going to be? One way to think about the barriers, or just like think about UDL in your class, is to just create a T-chart. And Taylor knows, right? The students' readings at various levels, right? She's got two students who's got phonologic deficits. She's got these other students who phonologically are fine, but they don't know how to read. She's got these other students who are language learners. They may have trouble with their vocabulary, right? So what are ways that we can eliminate them, right? Is it going to be audiobooks using high-low myth fable books? Allow partner reading? Is it going to be text to speech? We're going to front load the vocabulary, the visuals, and how we can think about the decoding support. And then, the writing is obviously going to be on various levels too. So what are we going to do in terms of a graphic organizer? Are we going to offer them to dictate their story? Do they know how? Have we taught them how to use dictation in our classroom? Are we going to use checkpoints on their student drafts so we keep that, so their executive functioning skills along the way, so they can plan, initiate, all that sort of stuff. Oh, speaking of which, students vary on their executive functioning skills. So are we going to have a clear rubric with dates and times when they have to turn things in? Are we going to check in with them? And then, of course, students vary in their emotional regulation, including anxiousness when presenting, behavioral regulation. So how are we going to break down those barriers? Give them options to record themselves, check in with them. Is it going to be a mood meter? Do you have a social emotional learning program in your class to talk about these things? Whatever it is, there are ways to break down barriers there. And then we have to design ideas to meet those students' needs. So again, students vary on their grade levels. How are we going to break down barriers there? I'm a huge proponent of, I'm like a reading person, so I always like to do decoding practice. So one way to do it, like everyone's like, well, how do I get decoding into my class? I'm like, well, just take the vocabulary terms and then practice decoding it. And you may not think that all students are going to need it, but if you give students a tool and you show them how to decode, as a whole you know, everybody, you give your students who struggle at decoding opportunities to see it daily. And also the morphology aspect of it is that, like, oftentimes the prefix, the suffixes, the roots are all connected to meaning, right? So if you teach them decoding strategies, and just, you know, project it on the board, oh gosh, what happened there? It went away from everybody. We were doing so well, and then of course something came in here and I took it away. I tried to annotate. How dare I do such a thing? Anyway, I'm gonna do it because I'm a masochist here, apparently. So yeah, so I would just be like, okay, we're gonna identify the vowels and decode the word. Like, just have the 5 words on the board that are going to be our vocabulary for the day. So again, they got to dot the vowels. Okay, well, why is a vowel? What's going on here, right? We talk about it. Okay, this one too. We're like, okay, well, what about this? Is this like a suffix? Is this is a vowel, but whatever it is. You know, and then we can actually talk about, you know, these rules when, and again, I know I'm being annoying by doing it all, but then, you know, then you also want to break the words, right? So then you're like, okay, well, where are we going to break these words up? You know, and you just have the students do it, whatever it is. You could talk about, okay, yeah, we always break between double consonants, right? Oh, remember AL, you know, that can, you know, grab a word, you know, grab a letter, whatever it is, right? Oh, here's the TED, right? Like, what happened there? That means what? Past tense, right? Okay, we got EN, that's a prefix, right? And we got champ, you know, this is going to be a root word, whatever it is. Oh, remember OU, that's a vowel team, right? Where are we going to break this up here? Oh, we got FUL, that we know that's a suffix. What are we going to do here, right? Do we break it here? Do we break it here? You know, you can talk about these things. It doesn't have to be long. It could be quick. But again, it's bringing that decoding aspect into it. It's bringing the morphology into it. And it's also bringing the vocabulary into the classroom. And then you could talk about what these words mean. This is terrible decoding over here, by the way. Just, you know, if I, whatever it is, I'm going to clear all this because I'm embarrassed of my bountiful over there. You know, and you could be like, oh yeah, if you did do that, you're like, well, N doesn't have a vowel, right? So like, how could we decode it in that way? So then you're like bringing in these components into your vocabulary lesson. And it doesn't have to be long, right? It's just a quick way to get in and talk about the decoding aspect, breaking words down, and talking about the syllable types embedded in the vocabulary. Oh, that's an R-controlled vowel in moral, right? OU, that's a vowel team. Bount. Then we got this I, right? What do you think that is? Oh, yeah, when a Y ends it, you know, when a Y, you know, when there's a Y at the end of a word, you change the Y to an I, and then you add, you know, whatever it is, right? So all that sort of stuff you can talk about if you just do a quick little intro with your vocabulary. I was going to do it here as well, but I think just in the interest of time and how painfully I decoded last time, I'm going to move on. Another way to do it is in terms of perception is live ink. So it's sort of an older interface, you know, now in the days of AI, and I'll talk about some AI stuff later in the training as well. But all live ink does is format the text differently. So you can just highlight whatever text you want, a paragraph, and then punch it into live ink, and it comes out as stanzas. So then if you have a student who like sees the dense text of like a paragraph and is like, yeah, I'm not going to attempt to read that, you can provide them with a varied way to perceive the text, right? You know, it could be, of course, there's tons of ways to do it, like thinking about, you know, color on their computer screen if they're doing it on a computer or whatever it is, or enlarging text. This sort of just makes it in stanzas. So here, if we were going to do the fox and the grapes, which is one of my favorites, so you guys have to deal with it. Sorry, not sorry. So, you know, here's the story. So all I did was highlight the fox and grapes and then punch it into live ink, and then it comes out as stanzas. So again, same exact information, formatted differently. So then you could be like, all right, you know, I'm like, okay, so everyone gets the option. Do you want to read it in this way, or do you want to read it as stanzas? If you're reading it as stanzas, like, I want you to like dot the vowels, whatever it is. And then because it's formatted differently, they have an opportunity to practice those decoding skills within the text, as opposed to like in the dense test, which can be harder for students, especially if they have orthographic deficits and have to like scan more dense text. So that's one way to go about that too. Does anyone ever use Google Lens? Google Lens is really cool. But again, it's a Google product that, is great if you're like shopping at the Goodwill to see like if the thing is worth any money, because you can just take a picture of anything and scan it, and then it'll show you all the other ones that are on sale. But the cool thing it does too is that it makes any text text to speech, including handwriting. So that's one of the challenges. And I do a ton of assessments of older students who are in high school who cannot read. And how do they access the curriculum? Right? Especially in the reality of the dynamic classroom, right? Where it's not just like everything is, a web document or a, word processing document. The teacher's handwriting things, whatever it is. So all you do in Google Lens is you have to have Google Photo, but you take a picture of whatever it is. I'll do it here for you guys because why not? So yeah, you take a picture of whatever it is, and then you open up Google Photo, and you scan it. And then you make sure it's just on your text and not any other nonsense. And then you go to text, and then you go to listen.
You are Screenshar
Oh.
the eagle, and the beetle a beetle once begged the eagle to spare a hare which had run to her for protection.
And it's
But the eagle,
you can actually make it a little bit slower. That talks like I talk. But any sort of text becomes text to speech. So you can just take a picture of whatever, and then it can read it to you. Again, you'd have to like teach the student how to use the tool. And in third grade, it may not be appropriate, but it is one option there. And then there's a ton of different, chat or AI ways to go about changing the lexile score of readings. So, Chat GPT, Claude, Bing, whatever it is, whatever program you'd want to use, you could just highlight the text and just say, hey, I want this text modified to be second grade, but I want to keep these vocabulary terms in there. So, and then it will just spit it out for you. So you'll see, like I took it, I was like, make this paragraph third grade reading level, keep the words scornfully, gaping, longingly, in vain. And so it would just spit it out for me in that way. And then you could have the students use that. So again, it's a way to use AI to simplify the text quickly and then provide the students the same, with modified vocabulary so you can work on their comprehension and things like that. So there's a bunch of different AI programs you can use. I just showed you guys the Claude one. If you guys went to a training earlier today, they were showing this as well. So that's one option there, just in terms of like simplifying the text, because you're in 7th grade science and you're like, okay, my students are reading at 3rd grade level. How can we simplify the text? But I want to keep the vocabulary terms in there so that they're in context. That's one way to do that there. So that's that. And then Magic School is also another one, same sort of thing, right? You would scaffold the text. So again, I punched in the same text into Magic School. I set the grade level that I wanted the text to be. And this also will come out with literal questions for whatever you want. So you can have the students answer questions. It also will talk about the vocabulary. This is another way to use AI to support your students. So you could like print it out and be like, okay, here's the vocabulary. It's already there for you. Let's talk about these questions. You read it using the chat, the Claude one, and now let's answer the questions here. And again, some of the vocabulary is in there as well. Magic School's got a ton of different cool options in the program. So certainly check that out as well. Not going to get too deep into it, but I would just look online to see Magic School. It's a free program as well that, has a lot of different ways to scaffold text, create rubrics, things like that. So there's a lot of cool options there to support students in their like reading comprehension and vocabulary knowledge, and sort of change the formatting of the reading so that they can access it. Other ones like CAPTI, it's just a voice to text program. So, or speech to text program. So you can just punch whatever it is in CAPTI and then it comes out as speech to text. So, if you're working in Google Docs, that's a good way to go if the students need to access the curriculum that way. Obviously, if you just need books for them to access, audiobooks, the Epic app, Libby, which is through the public libraries, is a good resource as well, along with Clusive, which is through CAST. And the way CAST does Clusive, there's a lot of nonfiction stories inclusive, and the way that they set that up is that initially they answer a vocabulary questions, like do they know how often do they use this vocabulary, and based on their responses it sort of pins them to a Lexile score, and then it presents the information at that level. So they're like, okay, I don't ever use these terms, so they're like, okay, we're going to drop the Lexile score to this, and then present the information about the gray wolf or about fox and grapes or whatever it is. Most of the stuff is nonfiction in there. There is some fiction, but that's also a cool resource to check out if you're just trying to figure out how to vary the reading level for students quickly and automatically, about a topic, and then have them express their knowledge. So that is Clusive. And then, students vary on their written expression. I think we know this, especially students who have executive functioning or dyslexia, or executive functioning deficits, right? Writing is the most complex task for students with executive functioning challenges, right? You got to plan, you got to organize, you got to initiate, you got to, inhibit yourself from looking all around, right? You got to do all this stuff in order to write. So, how to support the students in their overall written expression, certainly, is it going to be dictating? Is it going to be drawing out pictures? Is it going to be using graphic organizers? All that is going to be really helpful. Are you going to modify the prompt for them? All that will be really helpful. Are they going to draw it out first and write it out? Whatever it is going to be. Story mappings is going to be important there too. Also, if they have executive functioning deficits, are you going to use a visual checklist of things like, does it have, opening line? Does it have this? Does it have this component? And one, digital visual checklist is Google Keep. It's just a checklist creator. And it's cool because you could use it to do did you use the steps? Did you write all the components of a paragraph, or how to solve a long division problem, or whatever it is? I mean, for me, I'm a grown adult, right? But I still need to keep lists of how to do things, what I need to do, whatever it is. So Google Keep is something that allows you to just use a checklist, teach your students how to use a checklist so they keep track of things they need to do, and also organize themselves. It could even be used for behavioral checklist, whatever it is. The nice part about it too is if you work with middle school students, you could send it to all of them, and then also their families could see it, and the other teachers at the school could see it, right? Because as opposed to the planner, which kind of gets buried in a backpack, right, along the way, okay, what's happening with the student, where they are on this task, and everyone can sort of access it. So that's Google Keep. And then just in terms of graphic organizer or mind map, thinking map, whatever it is, it's just a thinking map, is a visual map for how to, organize writing, think about, first, second, third, whatever it is, how however they want to organize themselves in a visual manner. That is an option there as well. There's a ton of other, I made a Padlet for this and I didn't even put it in the chat for you guys, and I feel bad, and so I'm going to do that now. That has all these things in it, because clearly I just started going. So all that is in there. So the Padlet link is there. So if you want to look at any of those things, and I think also the slide deck should be in there. I know I go really fast, so that's there. And then on the Padlet as well, there's these infographics for Chrome extensions for students with reading deficits, and then there's also ones for iOS. So both of those are options. to take a look at. Again, a technology tool is only going to be as good, as good as its use, its use, and if it's connected to the, a curriculum goal. But there are many different ways to use technology to break down barriers, especially with reading. But I also think even the simplest ones of, right, bringing in the morphology, the decoding into your vocabulary, into your thematic unit is something that benefits all students, right? Even the students who know how to read, because those components of language are going to be there when they're in high school, when they're in college, on the SAT, whatever it is. And it will help them if, you're sort of doing it as a group, it will help the students who are really struggling on a word level decoding and reading, and students who, are fluent in reading, but, need to understand the vocabulary terms or prefixes and suffixes and their meanings. So there's that. Here's the iOS one. And yeah, that was fast and furious, but I have made it to the end of my spiel here. If you have questions, I'd be happy to take them. If you have concerns, please feel free. I'm sorry that was so fast and furious. A lot of information, but let me know. Please ask if you have any. Yeah.
I'm a mod severe special ed preschool teacher, so this was like very informative and different sphere of the world that I usually work in. But you mentioned like early screening is very important. Is there anything you recommend for like a TK kindergarten age, or what do you recommend for that subset?
Yeah, so the same sort of thing. I would do like the phonological stuff, the larger phonologic units. Like, can they discern? I mean, first of all, do they have one-on-one correspondence, right? Like, can they they're little, so like that. But then it's like, can they hear like words in a sentence or like syllables? Can they like feel it and hear it? But depending on their overall cognitive abilities, right? Or like, I mean, you're in a mod severe class. So again,
I have included students, so I have tickled students who I see who are on the way to resource, and of course don't get a full intervention until 2nd or 3rd grade. And I'm I can tell that they have a learning disability at this point.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I would start with the largest units of sound first. Okay. If they have one-on-one correspondence. So the core phonological segmentation test, it's just segmenting sounds, but it uses like a manipulative. So it's like the ball rolls. Can they discern those 3 chunks of sound? Again, they don't have to read it, right? They're just hearing it and being like, that's 3 things. But again, they have to understand the concept, right? And then you can go into syllables, right? Okay, you're like, how many syllables are there in, soda or whatever it is. I'm sorry, I have a can in front of me. Right. So it's like, or water, right? So they're like water, right? And can they give you 2 blocks? That would be the first thing that I would look at in terms of their phonological processing. And then also I would just generally screen their sound symbol correspondence, right? Letter names is great, but like the letter names it doesn't really help you, right? Like yeah. So sound symbol correspondence, and then like, again, there's no letters involved. You're controlling the sounds, but can they discern the large chunks of sound first, like words and syllables? The phoneme stuff is a harder task, and actually comes on a little bit later, like 6 and 7 years old, which is probably where your kids are. But like, it's a little bit of a harder task. But I would look at like on the Padlet will be the core phonological segmentation. Again, it's just pulling them apart, right? It's not blending them together. I'd want to see if they could blend syllables together too, if like how they're fluid in there. And then just thinking about maybe the rapid naming part as well. That's the area I would look at first.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming, and I'm gonna be presenting in like 20 minutes for the Dyslexia Initiative on dyslexia interventions. If you guys want to just keep listening to me talk over here. Thanks, Erica. I appreciate it. I hope it wasn't too fast and furious. Okay, cool. Yeah, enjoy. The AI stuff is very cool, like in terms of like Lexile stuff and like low, just like making it accessible, because you can just be like, make this 1st grade level, right? And it will make it for you, and then you can print it off. and I would also really look into Magic School. It's got a lot of cool stuff in there, in the AI, and then you know, some stuff hopefully you guys can use. Cool. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate you guys being here. Yay, I'm getting applause. Woo. I'll see you hopefully next time. You know, I guess you can rate this training at some point. I don't know. Yes, apparently rate this training. So they'll have me back, right? They'll have me back. Gina's saying yes. Gina, advocate for me. Thank you so much. And I'll see you guys next time. Sorry for letting you guys go early. Nobody gets in trouble for that, right? Okay.